Hey everybody, it's Attorney Richard Seller back at it again with a little discussion about our firm's practice of overtime, minimum wage, unpaid wages, those sorts of concepts that come up on an absolute daily basis in our practice. You know, an employee's right to wages is the lifeline of our families. And what's happened in this country as the economy's taken dips and turns, both for good and for bad, is that employers have become more and more sneaky about the things they're trying to do to, excuse my language, screw employees out of their wages in the workplace. And what we do, what we focus on as part of our practice in this firm is rooting out some of these tricks that employers try to do to employees, which at the end of the day winds up making the employers more money by stealing it from their employees. And obviously that's not a fair situation, and that's not something that we allow to stand. So, some of the most common violations we see are overtime violations. We see them commonly in the workplace. I'll give you an example of an egregious situation that I had not too long ago. But these are the types of sort of run-of-the-mill situations that we see. We have a situation where an employer may hire an illegal alien, somebody who's not documented to work in the United States, and what they'll say to the employee is, look, you're going to work 70 hours a week for me, and I'm going to pay you a flat salary of $500 a week. I'm not going to take any taxes out. I'll pay you off the books. Okay? So what happens there is that you've got a poor undocumented worker who has no choice but to accept these sorts of terms and conditions, and the employer's doing hard labor out in the field, or the employee's doing hard labor out in the field, doing construction work, which is very common, working 70 hours a week, and because most of the time employees don't know their rights, the guy's working 70 hours a week for $500 a week and doesn't think any different. Well, we get in, we take a look, and we see that the employee's working 70 hours. And that he's not getting paid overtime. So the law is, very simply, under the federal law, if you work more than 40 hours a week and you're not generally a manager or a major decision maker or a doctor or lawyer or accountant, you're entitled to be paid time and a half for your overtime hours worked. And it's a very simple law. It's been around since the 1930s. But employers try to disregard. So at the end of the day, just to bring that story to a quick conclusion, we were able to secure the employee about $45,000 in unpaid wages under the overtime laws. Here's the great thing about those cases. In addition to having to pay the employee what they're actually owed in overtime over a 2 or 3 year period, depending on what the court allows, the employee may also be entitled to what's called double or liquidated damages. That is a penalty to the employer for wrongfully withholding the employee's overtime to begin with. So that $45,000 very quickly turned into $90,000 for the employee. This is a person who came to this country, was taken advantage of for 2 to 3 years, and we were able to really successfully change that person's life. The other great thing about these cases is that the employer is obligated to pay your attorney's fees, which means even if you only have a case for $500 that you've been taken advantage of, the employer has to pay you that $500 and then has to pay all of your attorney's fees incurred in our representation, which means we're not taking from you. They are paying our attorney's fees and costs, which is certainly a great thing, and it incentivizes employees to stand up for their rights. Because think about it, how many lawyers, if they knew they could only take a percentage of a $500 case, would want to help an employee and spend all their time and money in court? They wouldn't. This is why the law incentivizes lawyers like us to take the cases, because we don't have to worry about not getting paid. So we go out and we fight for the clients just like you. And that's important. So that's an example of an overtime case. Minimum wage cases also fall within that. We see them very commonly in the restaurant industry. And we frequently represent classes of employees who work in restaurants, such as servers, bartenders, who are being subjected to these illegal tip pool violations. Situations, for example, where managers, or what they call front of the house, are participating in the tip pool and taking money out from the servers and bartenders and wait staff's wages. And that's a totally illegal practice too, and it's very common, especially down here in Florida, in the touristy areas such as Orlando and in Tampa and Jacksonville, and certainly down in Miami and Fort Lauderdale, where there's a ton of tourism and there's a ton of restaurants. So generally what happens in those situations is we just represented a class of about 80 employees, servers and waiters and bartenders, who the management was taking part of their tip pool, meaning all the money and tips get pooled by the hourly paid wait staff, and they were giving it out to other people who weren't considered tipped employees, managers, polishers, expediters, people that are not generally tipped employees were sharing the tip pool. And the court found that that was illegal, and we were able to recover a substantial amount of minimum wage violations for these employees. So these are the types of things that come up. I'll give you another example of the type of case that we handle. We handle cases based on unpaid wages or commissions. Here's a perfect example. We represented a employee who worked for a very successful real estate agency. And here's the trick. So the employee was supposed to be paid based on commissions. The employer was very clever and said, you're only entitled to be paid for commissions on the date you're employed, meaning if you're not employed at the time the commission comes in, we don't have to pay you. So guess what the employer does? I got to imagine some of you are out there saying, I know how this story ends. Our employee goes out and does a lot of work and generates a ton of commissions that are supposed to be due and payable by the end of, let's say, September. Okay? However, September 27th comes around, 3 days before the commissions are supposed to come in, and the employer decides willy-nilly, we don't want you working here anymore. That's right. They fired the client to get out of having to pay the commissions. The client was owed about $60,000 in commissions. That's the type of case we'll take. So we go to court, we file the suit, and it's clear to the judge, it's clear to the jury that what they did to this individual was they fired him specifically to get rid of or to get out of having to pay these commissions. And that's another type of case that we take on. Other things, employees are offered bonuses, they're not paid their bonuses, or an employee is fired and not paid their accrued vacation time. These are all instances and types of things that we go after. The law in this area is very technical. Believe me, I'm not getting into it here on this call. If you want more information about that, obviously please visit our website. We go into a lot of detail about who's entitled to overtime, who's entitled to minimum wage, what are the top mistakes that employees make, those sorts of things. I think it's beyond our conversation here this morning. But from a perspective of the types of things we look at, we look at cases from the perspective of both the employer and the employee. Is there a valid reason why the employer is attempting to violate the law? From our perspective, it may not necessarily matter whether their intentions were good, but in analyzing the cases, we obviously do a very detailed intake and investigation of all of our clients' claims. We'll sit down with the client either by phone or in person. Some clients prefer email or telephone rather than coming in for meetings. That's okay in this day and age of technology. And we'll literally go through the pay stubs and figure out what the violations are. You would have no idea how many times we've got a client that comes into our office for one thing. Let's say they feel they've been discriminated against, and they have no idea that they're not being paid overtime or that their pay practices are illegal. And we find them. And that's part of what a law firm should be doing for their clients, is we sit down and we don't just look at the one issue you're coming in for. Because there's a reason you're coming to us. We're lawyers, we're experts, and we're here to evaluate not only what you're coming in for, but to see if there's anything else going on in your employment that may necessarily entitle you to additional wages. And that's the way things should be. When you go to a lawyer or you go to a doctor, let's say, and you're going in because you've got a chest pain, I imagine you also want the doctor to evaluate whether there's anything else going on in your body. Now, I'm certainly not comparing what we do to a life and death scenario, but I'm sure you'd feel a whole heck of a lot better if you knew the doctor was giving you a full workup head to toe to see if there's anything else that could potentially be wrong. And that's sort of the approach that we take with our clients in this area. So from an overtime, a minimum wage, an unpaid wage perspective, this is the type of stuff that we handle. Even if you look at our firm domain name, we refer to ourselves as the Florida Overtime Lawyer. We've been doing this for a significant amount of time. We know the tricks of the trade. We know the dirty things employers try to do. So if you'd like to take a closer look, or if you'd like for us to evaluate your case a little bit more closely, Take a look, educate yourself on the website. There's some forms you can fill out where we'll reach out if you want to contact us, or if you want to email us and leave us your number. We have a whole intake department dedicated to making sure that we reach out in a timely manner. Here's the analogy I always give in responding to clients. If you've got a leak in your house, you don't want to wait 2 weeks for a plumber to call you back. We operate the same way. If you're contacting us, you have a significant issue or question that you need an answer to. We're going to get on that as soon as we're in the office, as soon as we're available to call you back. We're not going to let your inquiry sit. That's not good business, and that's not fair to you, the potential client, who's in a time of need, who's asking for information. Hi, this is Richard Seller from www.floridaovertimelawyer.com. If you're a Florida employee and you feel your rights have been violated, reach out to our law firm, either toll-free at 866-344-9243 or at www.floridaovertimelawyer.com. I personally evaluate every claim that comes in, and I will give you the advice whether we think we can help you or not on your claims. Also, if you're outside the state of Florida, we handle cases all over the country. So go ahead and give us a call or an email and let us know how we can help, and you'll get candid advice from a candid lawyer about what to do with your claims.